All right, nerds. I've got Sass on the show today. He was one of the featured candidates on ofthepeople.us. He's running for Congress from the state of Texas. We're going to get to know Sass, why he's running, what he thinks of current events. Maybe we'll talk a little Yang. But before we do that, let's get Andrew to warm it up.
There's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds. Nerds for Humanity. Welcome, Sass.
Hello, nerds!
Let's get ready to rumble.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Nice to see you, Tom.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I know we've seen each other on social media, but it's always fun to talk to someone live. How's your day going?
It's going all right. It's going pretty good. I'm super into it. Sun's up, as you can see, coming through my window. I always love that, and I don't know. I'm feeling pretty good today.
Are you guys getting any of that heat wave in Texas, or how are things over there?
I mean, it's June. It's Texas. It's hot. So I haven't been paying attention to any like specific heat waves. I like the warm, so it's all irrelevant to me anyway. So I guess I don't have any like specific like I haven't been paying attention to it.
Yeah. I'm coming to you from Northern California, and we are struggling. It was like over 90 yesterday. But this is we're adjusting to this interesting climate.
In Northern California, that does sound a little high.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Like there were some some parts where had some power outages where everybody's maxing out the AC and
Oh my
infrastructure's not holding up.
We had that whole thing. I mean, in February we couldn't keep the electricity on because it was too cold, and then this last week we couldn't keep the electricity on because it was too hot.
Yeah.
And at the same time, of course, the governor's like asking for public donations to build a fence. Like, what is going on here?
Well, tell me, Sass, tell me a little bit about yourself for those who aren't familiar with you. Who's Sass?
Yeah, I'm just a regular person. My background is in restaurant work, server, manager. And last year, I'm no exception. I lost both of my serving gigs a day apart from each other in March. And I just kind of got to sit and reflect while watching the whole country burn down before me. And I was like, you know what? I can do something about this. So I'm doing something about it. And that's really it. That's really all it comes down to. I mean, like I have a laundry list of reasons that I'm running, but like that was like the catalyst. That was like, all right, it's time to get in there. Time to do something.
Why? Tell me a little bit about why the congressional office, and how had you considered other ways to get engaged and be helpful?
Yeah. So I did like consider other offices. There are a couple of reasons I went congressional. For one, qualifying for U.S. House is like one of the easiest seats to qualify for of any elected office in the country. Because a lot of it is codified into the Constitution, and so states can't mess with it. There was also this other, like I said, this opportunity. The census was happening, and we knew Texas was going to pick up multiple seats. And Austin was the fastest growing city of the last decade in the country. And I'm in Austin, and I was like, there's going to be a new district like right here. A brand new district with no incumbent. I'll have a chance to win. And I know that, there's this whole turn Texas blue thing, whatever, which is a little bit nonsense. Obviously, Republicans won the presidential race, the Senate race, every single House congressional race, and every single state legislator race in 2020 against every serious Democrat challenger. Of course, but it was like kind of this like Texas is transforming though. Like you can't deny that. And I was like, I think there's an opportunity here for me to, because there's no incumbent, for me to do something different and really like almost split the difference. And in a way, as well as get a lot of people engaged who haven't been engaged, like I really feel like I have a message that speaks to non-voters and disenfranchised voters, and independents and the whole full range of people, plus all the Democrats and Republicans who are fed up with their own parties. And I think I could do something really, really unique here. So that's where I'm coming from, man. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. Did they decide, or what is the new district? Like, what's the latest on that?
Yeah. So the pandemic, this is crazy. So normally right around now is when the district lines would be starting to get finalized. Mm-hmm. But the pandemic has pushed the census data back so far that the preliminary data isn't going to come out until mid-August, when normally it comes out at the end of March. Wow. And the final data won't be out till the end of September. So we're looking at like October or November before these districts are drawn. So nobody has any districts. So there are a bunch of people running in Texas already who've already announced their districts. And I'm like, guys, what are you doing? And here's like even further, you see we have 254 counties. Out of those 254, 104 of them have decreased in population over the last decade, despite the fact that Texas has grown as a whole in population more than any other state in the last decade. Mm-hmm. And so these districts are going to look so different. So, I mean, like, yeah, it's going to be pretty crazy leading up to, because that's right around the time that we have to register for the ballot too. So there's going to be a whole rearranging of who's running where. And I've thought it through, but apparently nobody else who's running in Texas has actually considered all of this.
So the state's going to get some more congressional seats, mm-hmm. and then the state house is going to try its darndest to draw these districts to basically split up those little blue spots, I'm guessing, right?
Who knows what's going to happen? Yeah. I've heard, I don't know how accurate this is, but from what I understand, the person who was leading the redistricting committee actually was like a former Democrat turned Republican while in office, but is now more sort of an independent or moderate. Okay. So it's like, oh, okay. So is this like an actual genuine attempt to not gerrymander? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. The way I see it is like, I don't really care. I am building a campaign that includes all people. And whether it's all Austin or it's all rural or it's whatever, or some split, it doesn't matter to me because I'm including all people in this campaign.
So tell me a little bit about the campaign so far. Like, how's it been? When did you just announce and what have you been up to?
I mean, I decided to run more than a year ago, like May. Yeah. May or June of last year. I didn't really get going until like basically just after the November election. So, I mean, it was like they were like tallying up the votes and I was like calling up people and being like, so I'm running for 2022. like, well, hang on. I got to figure out who's going to be president first.
Yeah.
That's how that was going. But yeah, so there was no like official like announcement. I mean, if anything, there would be an announcement once I have a district I can go in, which is, of course, like the most difficult piece of this puzzle is like, it's really hard to focus in. It's like, there's no district, so I'm just casting a wide net. Of course, this is everyone, whoever I end up running against is going to be in the same place. Oh, it's so funny. Yeah, I'm actually working on like a total revamp of the website. You see it's version 0.9.5. I'm going to be getting version 1.0 pretty soon.
But those are some of the policies that you're passionate about. I'll interject a little bit and say, well, I make a difference, and this is going to be much more clear on the version 1.0 site.
that there's a distinction between my platform and my policy stances. So that's like A tier, B tier kind of stuff. So the platform is the freedom dividend, it's voting method reform, government accountability, and directly addressing division. So those are the 4 things. And so I have much bigger type ups. I just polished them off last night. Yeah. And so you see the my 4 pillars thing, but like I just have a paragraph on each. Like I have whole pages on all of those now. And so hopefully pretty soon I'm going to have that up and going on the website for people to read.
So what's been the response so far? Like, are people willing to even think about 2022, or is it mainly like really gearing up for a broader conversation, whatever, 6 months or 12 months from now?
I've had mostly positive responses. Even if at first they are negative responses, like, people complain about like the government doesn't do this, they don't represent the people, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's why I'm calling you. Like, let me and I've been able to win over a lot of people on this platform, where like, and really connect with people who have felt completely disconnected from the political process before. And they really feel like I'm onto some things that are really going to actually do something and make a difference.
So how is that working in terms of reaching that Texas kind of persona? Because as you mentioned and we showed, it did carry former President Trump despite all of his performance, and there were pockets of blue, but it seems like a pretty red state. Is your strategy to try and focus on the blue sections, or do you think there are like some kind of purple areas around Austin? Like, how are you going to try and get this done?
By building a campaign that includes all people. This is one of the problems, is like every time I talk to a consultant, they're like, you got to pick a side or whatever. And I'm like, okay, half the electorate doesn't vote. And of the half that does vote, half of them do not identify as a Democrat or Republican. And then that quarter that's left is now split 50-50. And then within that, you've got a ton of people who are like, man, I can't do this anymore. These parties suck. So, I mean, you're looking at like 70 or 80% of the country that's just like, man, I'm done with Democrats and Republicans. Like, I don't have the party loyalty. And so whether I run as a Republican or a Democrat or an independent is irrelevant to me. That's just going to be a strategic decision. But again, like, I believe that I can bring in people across the board. I really, really do. I've been able to connect with people across the political spectrum of any and all variety of political identities. And that's really what it comes down to, is like, if you have real solutions to real problems, we saw Andrew Yang did this, that like, you can absolutely attract people of all kinds. You just need to have the right message, and you need to not be so focused on the identity politics and the terminology we don't agree on and all the other nonsense that people are sick of in politics and makes them not want to be involved.
So I totally hear you, and I would love to see kind of a focus on the things that we all care about, irrespective of party. But you still got to get the party nomination. And I guess one of the things that has come up on this show when we talk to other guests is that, well, to win that party nomination, it's usually a system that doesn't reward kind of bipartisan or nonpartisan approaches. It tends to really favor the folks that are most kind of hardcore blue or hardcore red. How do you feel like, how do you think you'll try and navigate that primary process?
Yeah, I'm going to have to get a lot of people who have never voted in a primary before to vote in a primary. And that's no easy task, right? Like, that's significant. That's a big hurdle. Nobody said this was going to be easy. I'm trying to do something new here. I'm trying to do something different. But if people who don't have party affiliation, if they like you, they'll turn up. If you can really get them to like you, and you can get them to turn up at a primary, It's like, all right, man, how crazy would that? Especially because in Texas, you don't have to register to vote in a primary, right? So we have open primaries. Yeah, so that's another key factor here, right? Is that like, look, as long as you're registered to vote, if you've got an ID in the last like 4 years, and I don't remember when they did it, but they do have automatic voter registration now in Texas. Sort of. It's like it's when you get your ID. Then look, man, if I like it, and then look again, I'm including all people, so that doesn't mean that I'm excluding the hardcore Democrats or hardcore Republicans, right? Like I'm still going after them too, but I'm just saying like, and I think I can bring an additional set of people who don't normally go to the polls. I think I can get them to show up, which again is not easy. Like I get that, but I think I can do it.
So I've seen some folks on social media from Texas who are tend to be more conservative. They seem very, very interested in border security, immigration, and Second Amendment. I'd be curious, like how when they ask you about that, what's going to be, how are you looking at those issues?
Yeah. So with the border security, immigration, and with guns, the response is not uniform. I mean, this is one of the things that I've learned is that like political identity has very little correlation with policy stance. It just does. Like we can pretend that they're closely related, but in reality they're not. Most people agree on the vast majority of things. People just want better lives, right? People want a voice in what's happening in their communities. People want an opportunity to live a good life. And so with those specific issues, immigration, I think I'm a little bit more lopsided, but with the guns, I think I've struck a balance that a lot of people like. So with let's talk about guns then. So I kind of separate this into like gun deaths and guns, like two separate things. And gun deaths, like dealing with gun deaths is more of a short-term thing, and dealing with guns is more of a long-term thing. So in the short term, over 40,000 people, there are over 40,000 gun deaths per year in the United States. More than half of those are suicides. What are the root causes of suicide? It's mental health, it's economic disparity, it's culture, it's all these things. It's not guns, but the important thing to note here is that suicide with a gun is 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times as lethal as suicide without a gun or with other methods. And if somebody survives a suicide attempt, more than 90% of the time, they go on to live a long, healthy life. They don't end up dying from suicide later on. So if we can remove guns from the suicide equation, we can save a lot of lives very quickly. It's not about getting from 40,000 to 0. It's about 40,000 to 30,000 or 20,000 or 10 through simple little things like universal background checks, universal waiting periods. But I think long-term, a more sustainable solution is at a high level to empower the gun community to regulate itself. So mechanically, how I see that being done is by empowering local militias to write the rules and regulations for obtaining, keeping, and using firearms. And then we hold those militias accountable both through the Department of Justice at the federal level and whatever local measures are deemed appropriate. And what this does is this gives people in a community more voice over how guns work in their community. So whether you are not a gun owner and you are concerned about your kid's safety who's going to school, or maybe you are a gun owner but you're advocating for more safety, or maybe you're in a rural area and you feel the restrictions are the federal guidelines that we'll have to cover the gaps are too strict because you do need that extra protection from wildlife that entrenches on your land, which is a real thing. That's like then you can have those adjustments. And this is really important because guns really are a community level issue, right? You shoot a gun in California, it doesn't kill somebody in New York. And so I think this is Second Amendment compatible language that allows people, that gives people the voice that they need to address this issue, especially because we have data that shows that more guns in cities leads to more gun deaths, but we don't necessarily have that same data in rural areas, right? So it's reasonable that our approach should be different depending on where you are. So I see this as just a workable solution, so long as we bring gunners into the conversation to have a more local approach rather than a one-size-fits-all solution for the whole country.
One of the other platforms that you have is around government accountability. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so transparency is irrelevant without accountability, and vice versa. I wouldn't say that our government is all that transparent, but it's definitely not accountable. And we know this because when the emails do leak, when the recordings do come out, nothing changes, right? So accountability needs to come from outside of the entity that's being held accountable. So it needs to come from the people in this case. So here's my idea. I'm building a platform, like a public forum of sorts, where constituents in my district can log on, verify their residency, and among other things, every time I vote on a piece of legislation, they'll be able to approve or disapprove of my vote on that piece of legislation. So they'll be able to see the legislation, summary, kind of plain English translation of it, why I voted the way I voted, some education about it, but then I will have a public scorecard of how representative I am of my district. And the really cool part is this is going to be open source. So once we work out the bugs and kinks on me, this can be applied to every elected representative across the country without their consent. And this creates a continuous public feedback loop that's been missing, right? So far, we've only really had phone calls and emails, which are these private channels that can be ignored. You have like polling, which misses a lot of people, and it's usually these very broad like approval ratings. And then you have elections every 2 or 4 or 6 years that are mired in this just rat race and terrible voting methods and all this crap. And this is a way to actually hold representatives accountable every step along the way. And we can introduce all sorts of cool features like proxy voting, so people can choose to have somebody else vote on their behalf on a given topic, but can always rescind it at any time. And we can pull on additional topics or other things that representatives do. And taking this a step further, the really cool part about this is this will give like quote unquote good representatives who actually care about their constituents and the people, additional leverage in Congress that we've not had before. So right now, how do laws get passed? Well, Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Kevin McCarthy, right? These party leaders, they bribe representatives with money by saying, okay, well, I'll fund your next election campaign if you try to get primaried, so long as you go along with my bill or whatever I want you to vote on. So they're being bribed with money right now. I can't beat that money, but I can bribe them with votes. I can go up to a representative and I can say, hey, I pulled 10,000 voters in your district. 6,000 said they voted for you, and of that 6,000, 70% said they support my UBI bill. And of the 4,000 who voted against you, 80% said they support my UBI bill. If you co-sponsor my UBI bill, I will tell all of them for you for free. Now I'm just bribing them with votes instead of money, which is how, I mean, it's kind of weird to say it like that, but it's a 21st century hack around the gridlock that we're experiencing right now. So this is kind of the whole thing, putting it all together of like how we actually begin to hold our government accountable in a very realistic way and how to use that leverage to actually get what we want done.
That's a super cool idea. It does seem to depend on the voters being informed and, you know, have an opinion on things like the UBI bill. And I guess I wonder, how do you get over the hump where people often will dismiss things like UBI? They'll say, well, you know, that's a handout. I'm not for that. I'm for freedom. And you really can't break through that kind of intellectual gridlock that happens, you know, partly from the media that folks consume, how they get their information, and the kind of like mental model that they have for anything that doesn't align with, you know, what they believe to be the way to go forward. Have you found? I mean, certainly anybody watching this channel is generally open to new ideas, but there's a whole other 99% of the country that is just anchored in on both sides to like a very specific view of the world. And you talk about unity as part of your platform. How do you break through these bubbles that we're in?
Yeah, so that gets in another platform point, directly addressing division, or unity for short. And you would so there's a couple things here. Specifically, I just want to address, like, specifically with the platform, like I said, there will be education on there. It's also in the way that you ask the question. So I don't know if you're signed up for the Humanity Forward emails or not, but they sent one out like a month ago that was there was a poll done across a bunch of states, like thousands of people, asking about stimulus checks. And it was all about the way that you worded it. So there was a question that was something along the lines of, do you support raising taxes on millionaires so they pay their fair share to support a program to get monthly stimulus checks? And across the board, across every demographic, more than 50% supported it. And across the country, it was 76% supported it, which was really, really cool. And so, like, this is a supermajority issue, and it's not the only one. It's like there's like 15 supermajority issues that are not being touched by Congress right now. But specifically more to this point of, like, okay, media narratives and stuff. I have found that I'm able to break through to people, that people have questions about UBI, and I'm able to have conversations with them. But with directly addressing division, there are two main things I want to do. So one is like legislative, and one is outside of legislation. So I'll start with legislation. So our media, from Fox to Facebook, is not incentivized to spread information. They're incentivized to make money. And they have found that the best way to make money is to spread misinformation and lies and propaganda to get people angry at each other, to divide us, to get more eyes on ads. Right? We have a term for this: doom scrolling. And so here's my idea. I want to cleanly define what counts as press. So if we think about this in the context of the First Amendment for a moment, I believe in freedom of speech for the individual. I believe in freedom of the press, but when I think of freedom of the press, I think of freedom of information, not freedom of misinformation. Now, there is no algorithm for truth, but if we can separate off the political commentary and the interpretation and the entertainment into this other thing, which we can then apply fairness doctrine to, we come back to the press side of things, and we can work to decouple press from the profit motive. One of the ways I see we could do this, definitely stole this from Andrew Yang, is having low conditionality funding for investigative and local and independent journalism. So we could have a program where independent journalists, it's totally optional, could get certified, basically just verifying that, like, yes, you are indeed a journalist, and, like, you know how to spot and avoid bias in your work. And then they would receive a salary and a budget from the government to just do their journalistic work, investigative, local, whatever. The catch is, what the effect of this? Well, there'd be a couple big effects, but the primary ones would be a decentralization of sources and of narratives. It would give people more places to go to find information about their community without having to be so central, or without having to be so focused on centralized media narratives. Now, the catch is that the journalists who are part of this program, when they publish their work, they would not be allowed to make any money off of it because they're already receiving a salary from the government. And so this way, you remove the profit motive from their work. Now, this is all fully disclosed, right? So whatever category you're in, if it's a political commentary show, then at the beginning of the show and on screen the whole time, you have to say, this is not news, or you just have to say, like, this is just commentary. If it is a news program, you say, this is news, or this is press. And then if you are part of this if you're part of this program, this government funding program, at the top of the article, it says, hey, I'm getting a government salary. I'm not allowed to make any money off this, like, full disclosure. And what this does is it gives people more informed choices about the type of content they're consuming. I don't see this as the end all be all to addressing this issue, but I do see it as a way to mitigate some of the problems. So before I go on to the outside of government thing, I just want to pause and give you a chance to respond to that because I said a lot.
Yeah. Well, how do you, what do you do if someone's getting government money and they kind of veer off course and they start becoming clearly commentary? How do you, how do you make that call? Because at some point, some human in the government is deciding, and that makes me a little nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, so again, two important notes here. A, this is an optional program. It does not affect anybody who doesn't want to be part of it. And also it's what was the other thing? They're not making any money off it, right? The profit motive drives a lot of journalists to behave in these, to behave in these crazy ways. But the FCC in the past has already done this job before. There's no reason they can't start doing it again. This is, again, when I mentioned fairness doctrine, this fairness doctrine had huge support from Congress for decades. And it is just like happened to be a couple key individuals in power who were able to shut it down. We're talking about presidents vetoing it. We're talking about like just a couple commissioners at the top. Like it's just ridiculous. It's just been a whole ridiculous story. Just read the Wikipedia article. You don't need to dive that deep. But so the FCC in partnership with other journalists, right? So these are like other journalists would be able to report each other or hold each other accountable. I mean, how to actually develop the certification program. Like I'm not a journalist. I need to consult with a variety of journalists across the spectrum to actually put this whole thing together. I need to rely on experts a little bit. And again, I don't see it as perfect, right? Like I do see there are flaws. I don't think this is going to end everything, but I do think that it can help.
Let's set aside the whole, like, how do we make sure government is objective about just, who gets funded and who gets, removed from such a program.
But again, you can have journalists like for example, Crystal and Sagar on now Breaking Points.
Yeah,
they likely wouldn't apply. They've got their own thing. They've figured out how to do it without funding, and they wouldn't be affected at all. All they have to do is just disclose what kind of content they're doing. So this doesn't cut out journalism. This doesn't cut out journalism in the country. This is just a way to help fund that local journalism that's been missing.
Gotcha. How do you address the demand problem? Because you could argue, well, there's pretty good local journalism. It's not as much as before, but like some of the local NPR stations, PBS, there's good, decent information out there, but people like the kind of sensationalized version. I mean, even on Fox, it's Sean Hannity and the dude that used to have the bow tie. They're the ones that are getting the views. It's not the actual Fox News kind of programs. It's and people enjoy getting fired up, and they almost are attracted to this sense of our team is better and that other team is so crazy. So if you even had these local new sources of local information, are you worried at all that people will just tune into their respective echo chamber, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, like is a strong word. I would agree that they're drawn in, but that they actually like it, I think, is more questionable. It's really feeding on these just like very human, there's like flaws in our human psychology, basically, is really what that digs into. I understand the point of there are going to be a lot of people who will decide that they just want to watch political commentary, and that's fine. Again, I don't see this as the end all be all. But if at the beginning of the program, Sean Hannity has to say, this is not news, or whatever the phrase ends up being, I'm picking something that's intentionally provocative. that might make a difference. And also, the numbers these guys are polling are not great anymore. They're not like they used to be. They've fallen off a lot more than you might realize, and that's why we see such a huge boost in like Joe Rogan podcasts. It's like people do want this long form stuff, and this is kind of getting into the other thing I want to do outside of government. So something I'm going to do throughout and beyond my campaign is every week I'm going to host a live stream where I bring on somebody who disagrees with me and just talk, just have a conversation. Because there actually are a lot of people who are sick of the screaming matches on cable. They are, they're craving this, right? They want to remember what it's like to talk to somebody they might not agree with, because people don't like losing friends and family over these stupid identity politics and the labels and the terminology we don't even agree on what it means anymore, right? And I mean, like, I know the media's gonna want to put me in a box and get their sound bites, but I'm going to be adamant about saying, no, I'm focused on solutions that include all people and making the best decisions for today and for the foreseeable future, regardless of where they come from. And I've done this a couple times before in limited contexts, and gotten incredibly positive responses. So I want to try to bring it to the public at a bigger scale. But what I need are people who disagree with me to hopefully actually be best if they lived in the Austin area so we could meet face to face. I need to get some more equipment for it, but ultimately that's what I would want to do, is have these face to face one-on-one discussions. It's so key. They have to be one-on-one discussions. The face to face is so valuable, but to actually get into the weeds with people, but in a way that isn't inflaming. People have a really positive response to that, I've found.
I hope you're right, man. I mean, I think that is certainly the model for democracy and kind of discourse that I would imagine the founding fathers had more in mind than what we see today. I just looked it up. I mean, still the number one source of news in America is Fox News. And the number one channel, the number one show on Fox News is Tucker Carlson. And yeah, I agree with you. Cable news is no longer the kind of dominant source or overwhelmingly dominant source of information, but it is the number one. There are more people watching Tucker than Rogan. And that's a problem, because if you watch Tucker, he projects this view that like every Democrat wakes up talking about like critical race theory and open borders. And I just think it's a caricature of the Democratic Party, but a lot of Republicans love that caricature. They need that caricature because it's very convenient then to be like, oh, well, I'm not in that group. I must be, real American.
Yeah, so two things here. Number one, back to this point of fairness doctrine, which is a thing that we had for a long time, and it worked. It required that programs such as Tucker Carlson's had somebody with an opposing point of view and gave them the same amount of time on air to express their opposing view. This fairness doctrine is if we can get fairness doctrine back in. I know Tulsi Gabbard's working on something like that right now. Like that would be immense. But I also, you had mentioned democracy and the model for democracy, and let's talk about that. This is a more indirect, but it's also incredibly important. So I know that you had on Sarah Wolk, Catherine Gell, and Aaron Hamlin to talk about voting methods.
Yeah.
So just to like full disclosure about like my stance with all of them, like Sarah Wolk is amazing. I work with Sarah Wolk all the time. Aaron Hamlin's great, star voting and approval voting, super into it. Catherine Gell doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. So I just want to be full disclosure. I just want to like make that stance very clear that that's where I'm at. I love her rhetoric about like the power of the dollar is stronger than the power of the vote. It is almost insurmountable to directly reduce the power of the dollar, but we can increase the power of the vote. I think that's great. But instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting is highly problematic. There are a ton of problems. because it suffers from the same extreme spoiler effect that our current choose one system has. It does not eliminate it, only mildly mitigates it. It still trends toward a two-party system because this is the whole thing. Our current choose one voting method always inevitably trends toward a two-party system. It rewards polarity because it rewards this idea that you can only support one idea or one person at a time because you can only make one mark on your ballot per race, right? So if we were to adopt approval voting, where you approve all the candidates you like, then you're flipping that dynamic from polarity to consensus. And that incentive is huge. It changes the political dynamic. It changes who ends up running for office and it changes who the electorate is and where the focus is and where the media ends up focusing. And that it just kind of trickles out, right? This is like the root of our entire democratic model. This is the thing that decides everything. So approval voting is more consensus. Star voting is also far more consensus than choose one voting, but it's actually like incredibly accurate. So approval voting has a consensus bias. Star voting has this just incredible level of accuracy. And voting method reform is a very ground up change. It's a lot like marijuana legalization or marriage equality. We do it starting in our community. So for example, I'm working with the Center for Election Science right now to get approval voting in Austin, even though it won't affect my election. And so this voting method reform is also a key part to indirectly addressing division by shifting our whole mechanism and system and incentive structure from polarity to consensus.
How did you decide to advocate for approval versus Star in Austin?
And part of it was just there was an opportunity for it. Star is great. Legal viability is also a question. Star is I'd say like the second most legally viable method, alternative method out there. And I'd say approval voting is the most legally viable. But different states have different election codes and they get incredibly convoluted and they're just a mess. And we think that approval voting's just a little bit more viable than Star. We have some lawyers really looking into it. We're hopefully going to get a final consensus on that soon, or extra set of legal opinions. I'm not against a Star campaign, but I think another piece of it too is like Texas has so many tiny towns. Star voting is a hard sell in a jurisdiction that doesn't have the money to redesign ballots and to retrain poll workers and to do this big voter education campaign. But approval voting, you can show up at a town hall, explain it in 5 minutes, have people vote on it there and be done with it. Like you can just do that, right? You can't like Star, that's a lot harder to do. And so like there are situations for both. If you can get Star voting in your jurisdiction, go for it. But do your homework, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Look at the money, look at the legal viability, look at the political will, look at past elections, look at turnout, and look at all these different things. And if you've done your homework and you're like, yeah, dude, Star voting, I can get Star voting on the next ballot, go for it. But if you look at it and you're like, it's going to take me a decade to get Star voting on the ballot, but I could get approval voting on the next ballot, just go for approval. We just need to get off of this choose one. It's so bad. Approval is the highest bang for the buck. And even Star voting advocates will agree with that like in terms of like the efficiency of like how I like to describe approval voting as the highest and fastest return on investment for any voting system shift in the US right now. So there are places for both. I advocate for both of these methods. They're both fantastic. It just so happened that approval voting, there was a great opportunity with the Center for Election Science. The right people were in the right place at the right time. The legal viability appears to be there. So that's why I'm fighting for approval voting. But that doesn't mean I have anything against Star voting.
There's a pretty big mayoral race coming up that's using ranked choice voting. I don't know if you've heard about that one in New York.
It's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, what's your take? What do you think is going to go down, both in terms of how Andrew's going to do, but also implementation of RCV?
Yeah, I hope Andrew wins, first and foremost. Like, again, full disclosure here, like, #gang gang. But I mean, we've seen like this tabulation is going to take forever, which is how ranked choice voting works. It's not precinct summable. It's one of the only single winner methods that doesn't have additivity, which is actually a huge problem, right? They need to centralize all of the ballot data to a single point of failure, which is a major security issue. And this is going to be the largest RCV election in U.S. history. And this is, you know, if we continue to expand this to have a bunch of big states, not states like Maine and Alaska, but like Texas ain't going to get it. But if like New York State were to get it, all of a sudden, a lot of foreign. Well, anyway, that's a whole other point. Let's focus on the NYC mayoral race. I'm going off track here. The NYC mayoral race is going to be a disaster if they do release the full ballot data. Traditionally, the full ballot data is never released. But if they do, and that data is analyzed, and it's determined that every quality voting method that uses ranked ballots determines that the winner, like, agrees that the winner should have been somebody other than what ranked choice voting picked, which there's a high chance of. That's more likely than it is not likely. There's going to be public outcry. It's going to be a big deal. This because it's a competitive races under RCV effectively pick pseudo random winners. That sounds crazy, but I'll highlight one thing to make it kind of clear in your mind. Imagine your first choice candidate is the last one eliminated. That means everything else you've expressed on your ballot, all those other rankings, are thrown away. They are never used in any capacity to determine who the winner is. How can you get an accurate result if you throw away half of the data? You can't, which is why no other voting method does this, right? And that's why star voting is I think the real next step for New York. You cannot get accurate results with ranked choice voting in a competitive election because it just throws away so much voter preference data. And that's why I think that this race is going to be a mess. It's going to be filled with near-tie nightmares at every round. People are going to be anxious waiting for the results, and the results are not going to make any sense. It's a complex, error-prone tabulation, the instant runoff, and New York will be lucky to come out on the other end unscathed by this method, which it's possible it could, right? By happenstance, it could end up electing the right person, but chances are that it won't.
I guess we'll see. We'll see what that's like. It's definitely going to be way more complicated, and New York City doesn't have an amazing track record of counting ballots recently, and this will be another layer of complexity. Have you been following Andrew? How would you rate him as a candidate in this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple times where he stumbled over his words. Obviously, that Palestine tweet, and then more recently the thing about like the mental health thing. You know, it's just like could have worded it better. Palestine thing, he probably just shouldn't have said anything. But I mean, like, I'm generally still positive. Like he's looking to run the biggest basic income trial ever. You know, and like, okay, we look at Eric Adams, like his own union endorsed Yang instead of Adams. Like, you know, he doesn't even live in New York, like Adams for New Jersey, right? You know, Scott Stringer's got these sexual assault allegations. I think it was Maya Wiley, right? Had this whole like union thing. Like union
I think that was Diana Morales.
Or Diana Morales. And then now Catherine Garcia, I just saw the headline right before we started that she's not returning the favor of saying rank Yang second, even though he's been saying rank her second. I mean, like, Paperboy loved Prince. I love him. He's great, dude. He's fantastic. But Yang and Paperboy, I think, are really the only two that stand out to me. I haven't been following like super duper close. But I mean, yeah, it's probably going to come down to Yang and Adams in the final round. But you know, we don't know what's going to happen, man. The polling, I think, has missed a lot of New Yorkers who are probably leaning toward Yang. That's my guess.
Yeah, if that's the case, then that might be enough to get Yang over the line. It will really require a lot of people who don't typically participate to come out and vote. So if you're watching this and you're in New York, or more likely if you have friends and family in New York City, give them a call, send them a DM right now, and encourage them to consider Andrew, because it's going to come down to the wire, and we could be so close to $1 billion UBI pilot. Like, seriously, that would be historic. Setting aside anything else you have about Andrew's statements, I certainly was not in agreement with such what appeared to be a poorly worded tweet about Israel. So, but you gotta keep the big picture in mind, that the guy's running for mayor of New York City, not Secretary of State.
Yes.
And
I know there's the controversy with like there's a NYPD unit in Israel or something. So like I know that's like a thing, but like again, still at the end of the day, like his stance on that issue isn't all that relevant to me, to like his job as mayor. But yeah, make your plan now for this Tuesday, June 22nd. Just rank him. Just put him on your ballot. My goodness. Even if you don't rank him number one, just put him on your ballot. Make a big. I mean, like that's what you got to do. And I mean, yeah, I'm telling you, when it comes to actually running the city, he's gonna do a way better job than anybody else.
I agree with that. Well, Sass, thank you so much for coming into the Nerd Zone and sharing a little bit more about yourself and your ideas. And any final closing remarks or asks of the audience watching this live or on replay?
Yeah, let me just think here. So we talked about government accountability, directly addressing division. We went over voting method reform. I'm not too concerned about UBI, so that's my main platform. But head to voteforsass.com, check it out. Send me a donation, $5 if you can, whatever. Just the more support, the better. You can find all my social media on there. I recommend going on my YouTube channel. And checking out. I've done a bunch of these kinds of long-term interviews and dove deeper into this stuff. I do live streams every Thursday at 1 p.m. Central. If you ever want to ask me questions, I'm incredibly accessible. But other than that, subscribe to this guy right here, Nerds for Humanity. And do I do the goodbye nerds thing, or?
I'll go first, and then you'll go get the last word.
All right.
With that, we're going to say goodbye, nerds!
Goodbye!